You are lying in bed, the lights just went out, and for one brief irrational second, before your rational brain catches up, some older part of you checks the room. Not because you heard anything, not because you saw anything, just because it's dark, and some ancient piece of your wiring refuses to fully relax until it confirms nothing is standing in the corner. You know there's nothing there. You've known it since you were roughly 7 years old, and yet the feeling still shows up, uninvited, almost every single night of your life. You are, statistically, safer right now than any human being in the history of the species. Locked door, solid walls, no predators within 1,000 miles capable of getting through your bedroom window. And still, something in you treats darkness like a live threat. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. That feeling isn't a flaw. It isn't something broken in your brain. It's a functioning survival system thousands of generations old, still running exactly as designed in a world it was never built for. Let's go back. Not centuries, not even thousands of years, millions. For most of the time our lineage has existed on this planet, humans were not the apex predator. No spears with metal tips, no walls, no locked doors, just skin, teeth, and instinct. Early hominins were mid-sized, slow, weak-clawed, and almost entirely dependent on daylight vision. At night, every single advantage a human had during the day disappeared. Your eyesight, your best tool, becomes almost useless once the sun goes down. Human night vision is genuinely poor compared to the animals that were actively hunting us. Lions, hyenas, leopards, and large cats in general evolved a reflective layer behind their retinas called the tapetum lucidum, which dramatically improves their ability to see in low light. We never developed anything like it, which means for the vast majority of our evolutionary history, the night belonged to something else, and we were, quite literally, on the menu. Fossil evidence backs this up in an unsettling way. Analysis of early hominin remains, including specimens attributed to Australopithecus, has revealed puncture marks consistent with predator bites, some matching the exact spacing of a big cat's canine teeth. Our ancestors were not simply cautious about nighttime predators as an abstract concept. They were regularly killed by them. Darkness was not a mood. It was a genuine, repeated, statistically significant cause of death. Now think about what that means for natural selection over an almost incomprehensible span of time. Individuals who felt nothing at nightfall, who wandered off casually after dark, who slept without posting a lookout, who ignored rustling sounds in low light, those individuals tended not to survive long enough to pass on that relaxed temperament. Meanwhile, the anxious ones, the ones whose hearts sped up the moment the light faded, the ones who startled at shadows and refused to stray from the fire, those were the ones who lived, who reproduced, who became your direct ancestors. Every person alive today descends from an unbroken chain of individuals who were, on some level, appropriately terrified of the dark. The fear didn't get bred out, it got bred in, generation after generation, because it worked. Here's the exact switch inside your brain that flips on. Your amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster of neurons buried deep in your brain responsible for processing fear and threat detection, does not require full information to activate. It doesn't wait for confirmation. It's built to fire fast and ask questions later, because in an ancestral environment, hesitation was frequently fatal. In darkness, your visual input drops dramatically, which means your brain suddenly has far less data to work with. And a brain with less data defaults to a very old rule. Assume the worst, act accordingly, correct later if you were wrong. That's why a coat rack in a dark room can briefly look exactly like a person standing there. Your brain isn't waiting to be sure. It's assuming the worst first and checking second. There's a name for this specific phenomenon, and you've experienced it more times than you probably realize. It's called pareidolia, the brain's tendency to detect faces and human-like shapes in ambiguous visual noise. Researchers studying this effect have found that the brain's facial recognition circuitry is so aggressively tuned that it will project a face onto almost anything, given the faintest suggestion of symmetry. 2 dots in a line becomes a face. A shadow with roughly the right proportions becomes a lurking figure. This isn't your imagination running wild for no reason. It's a hyperactive threat detection system doing exactly what kept your ancestors alive. Better to flinch at 100 coat racks than to miss the one actual threat. Sound takes over the job next. During the day, your eyes handle the vast majority of threat assessment. At night, that job gets handed almost entirely to your ears. And your ears, unlike your eyes, cannot close. You cannot look away from a sound. This is why a single creak in an empty house at 2 a.m. feels disproportionately alarming compared to the exact same creak at noon. Your brain isn't malfunctioning. It has simply, correctly identified that its primary threat detection tool is currently offline, and shifted full weight onto a secondary system that was never as precise to begin with. This same vigilance shows up in almost every prey animal on Earth. Across the animal kingdom, heightened vigilance after dark is essentially universal among species that evolved as prey. What makes the human case unusual is what we did about it. At some point, somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million years ago, depending on which archaeological site you trust most, our ancestors began reliably controlling fire. And fire did something no other survival adaptation had managed before. It didn't just provide warmth or cooked food, it pushed back the boundary of the predator's advantage. For the first time, humans could extend a small, flickering island of daytime safety directly into the heart of nighttime danger. This is why fire still calms us today. Darkness itself was never really the threat. Darkness was simply the condition that removed your ability to see danger coming. Fire didn't eliminate predators. It restored visibility, which restored your best sense, which restored your odds. That's why, to this day, a single small light source in a dark room can dramatically calm an anxious mind, even when the light illuminates almost nothing useful. The light isn't protecting you from anything real anymore. It's satisfying a threat detection system that is still, on some level, running software optimized for a world with lions in it. This is also why toddlers are terrified of the dark, and why plenty of adults quietly still are too. Fear of the dark tends to peak specifically in early childhood, somewhere around ages 2 through 6, and then gradually fades, though it never fully disappears for most people. Developmental psychologists have proposed that this timing isn't random. It roughly corresponds to the age at which a child would historically have started moving independently away from a caregiver's direct protection. An infant carried constantly doesn't need an intense fear response. A toddler who has just started walking, wandering, and potentially separating from the group at dusk absolutely does. The fear shows up right when it would have been most useful, then quietly recedes as the child grows old enough to reasonably assess real threats on their own. But modern fear of the dark isn't really about physical danger anymore. Surveys on adult fear responses consistently find that people report the anxiety is less about a specific expected threat and more about an unbearable sense of uncertainty itself, not knowing what's there rather than knowing something dangerous is there. That distinction matters. Your ancestors weren't just afraid of lions. They were afraid of not being able to tell whether a lion was present. Modern darkness triggers the exact same unresolved uncertainty alarm, even though the actual probability of a predator in your hallway is, for almost everyone reading this, essentially zero. That's also why the fear puts on a costume instead of staying formless. Cross-cultural anthropological surveys have found something remarkable. Nearly every documented human culture, separated by oceans and thousands of years with zero contact between them, independently develop stories about dangerous beings that specifically come out at night. Different names, different shapes, wildly different mythologies, but the same underlying pattern, over and over. A threat that cannot be clearly seen, that exists only in darkness, that becomes powerless or retreats at the first light of dawn. That is not a coincidence of storytelling. That is millions of brains, across every inhabited continent, independently converting the exact same evolved unease into a shape their imagination could actually hold on to. It's far easier for a mind to fear a specific monster than to sit with a vague, formless sense of being watched. So the fear got a face. Thousands of different faces, depending on where you were born, all serving the same original purpose. The clearest proof this system still runs at full power happens in your sleep. Sleep paralysis, a well-documented phenomenon where a person wakes up mentally alert but temporarily unable to move their body, is very frequently accompanied by a specific, recurring hallucination, the intense sensation of a malevolent presence in the room, sometimes at the foot of the bed, sometimes sitting directly on the chest. Researchers who study this phenomenon have noted that the experience is remarkably consistent across completely unrelated cultures, right down to the location and posture of the perceived intruder. One leading explanation is that this is your threat detection system briefly freed from the normal checks your fully conscious brain would apply, running its oldest, rawest program with nothing left to override it. Darkness, an unmoving body, and a mind fully convinced that something dangerous is close enough to touch. And this is really the whole story compressed into one image. You flip off the bedroom light. For 1/2 second, an ancient alarm system, built across millions of years by ancestors who were regularly hunted, briefly reactivates inside a perfectly safe, climate-controlled room with a deadbolt on the door. It checks the corners. It listens a little more carefully than it needs to. It waits for your eyes to adjust. The exact same biological process your ancestors relied on at the mouth of a cave, watching a dying fire, hoping it held until morning. Then, within a few seconds, having found nothing, it stands down, and you fall asleep, without ever noticing that you just ran the same ancient safety check that has been running, without interruption, every single night for the entire existence of your species. You're not scared of the dark because something is wrong with you. You're scared of the dark because, for almost the entirety of human history, being scared of the dark is precisely what kept your ancestors alive long enough to have you.